For your discussion today, you're going to talk about the paper that was assigned that looks at the relationship between these different levels of physical activity with different mental health outcomes during the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. So before you engage in your online discussion post, I want to make sure that you can understand some of the information in this article. Students often aren't totally sure how to interpret Table 1. This table is really important, and so in this video, I'm just going to briefly go over this table to make sure that you understand exactly what it means. So this is the Table 1 that you can find in the article. You will notice that there are 3 different models. There is a crude model. The crude model is just looking at the relationship between the independent variable and the dependent variable. It is not adjusted for any kind of confounder. It is just looking at the relationship between that independent and the dependent variable. You can also see there's another column here, this adjusted 1. This is looking at the relationship between an independent and a dependent variable adjusted for certain variables. So you can see that it says adjusted 1 up here at the top. To figure out what variables have been included or adjusted for, you would need to go down to the footnote section of the paper to see what exactly they controlled for. You can see here there's a statement that says the models presented are crude, no adjustments, and then you can see adjustment 1, adjusted for age, sex, ethnicity, marital status, employment, family income. And then you can see in the adjusted model 2, they've adjusted for even more covariates in that model. So it says adjusted 2, adjusted for age, sex, ethnicity, marital status, employment, family income. So all of the things they already included in the adjusted 1, and then they also included days in self-isolation, current smoking, current alcohol consumption, self-reported previous diagnosis of chronic diseases, self-reported previous diagnosis of psychiatric disorders. And so you can see how the models are adjusted for different things. The crude is not adjusted for anything. It's just looking at the plain relationship between an independent and a dependent variable. The adjusted is adjusting for certain covariates. And then the last model, adjusted 2, is adjusting for all of the things in the adjusted 1 plus some additional covariates. So that's what these crude, adjusted 1, and adjusted 2 mean here at the top. You'll also notice these rows here. These rows are looking at the association between independent variables and a dependent variable. So in each one of these, you've got independent variables, and it's showing you the odds ratio, the 95% confidence interval, and the p-value for the relationship between an independent variable and a dependent variable. So for each one of these, they have the physical activity level as the outcome variable. That's why you see there's nothing next to that variable. And then they have an independent variable that they're looking at. So for example, in this top one, they're looking at the relationship between depression and moderate to vigorous physical activity, the relationship between anxiety and moderate to vigorous physical activity, and then the relationship between having both depression and anxiety with moderate to vigorous physical activity. Now, I understand that this might not be totally clear at this point, so I'm going to kind of focus in on this last row here, and we're going to focus on this for our discussion, for the discussion assigned this week. So in this last row, we are looking at the outcome of sedentary behavior. That's our outcome variable. And each one of these, depression, anxiety, and depression and anxiety, each one of these is a separate independent variable that we're looking at. So the way to think about this is if I'm looking at just this crude relationship here, you can think about this result, this depression. Depression is our independent variable. Therefore, the exposed group would be depressed. The unexposed group would be people that are not depressed. And then the outcome is going to be sedentary behavior. The people without the outcome are the people with no sedentary behavior. And that gives us our results of 1.613 for our odds ratio. And then you also have the 95% confidence interval and the p-value. So to interpret the next row, the way to think about this is that this is looking at the relationship between anxiety as the independent variable and sedentary behavior as the outcome variable. If you assume that people with anxiety are the exposed group having anxiety, the unexposed group is no anxiety. If you set up this table and you plugged in the numbers based on the data, you would get this odds ratio of 1.382. Then to interpret this last row, this depression and anxiety, what we're saying is that the independent variable is having both of those things together. The exposed group, therefore, is people who have depression and anxiety, and the unexposed is going to be the people that have no depression and no anxiety. And again, our outcome variable is sedentary behavior. And if you were to calculate this for the crude, you would get an odds ratio of 1.639. So that is essentially what these odds ratios mean for the crude, their relationship with the outcome of sedentary behavior. You can think of each independent variable as having its own kind of 2x2 table with the outcome variable, and then these are the results of those analyses. Now, I also want to point out, we talked about how there's these adjusted models. When you're looking at things like adjusted models, you're using multivariate analysis to control for potential confounders. So you're using statistical software to run, as we can see in the title, logistic regressions. They're running logistic regressions using statistical software to look at the relationship between each one of these independent variables with the outcome variable of sedentary behavior, and they're adjusting for those potential confounders in the adjusted one, and then in adjusted two, they're adjusting for other variables that might also be potential confounders. So we've got crude results, and then we've got results from adjusted models. Hopefully this table makes a little more sense to you. If you have any questions on it, please reach out to me. I'm happy to go over it with you. But now that you understand what this table is displaying, please use this table, use this video. You're going to answer some questions on the article that you read, and hopefully engage in a discussion post that's really meaningful and helps you further understand the concepts that we've covered around confounding.